All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the ETS Travel Podcast. We're finishing up our Christmas journey, and we're going to be traveling to the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem today. So we're just going to step back in time and go through some of the history of one of the most sacred places in the Christian world.
Yes, this church stands over the Grotto, traditionally believed to be the birthplace of Jesus Christ. This isn't just an ancient building. It's a living, breathing testimony of God becoming flesh and dwelling among us. Emmanuel, God with us. Before we talk stones, mosaics, pilgrim lines, and even really interesting experiences, we need to dive into the text itself. Bethany, would you read Luke chapter 2, the first part in full, the moment Jesus is born?
And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. And all went to be taxed, every one into his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn.
Wow, that scene is so impactful and humbling, really, to understand that God himself would be willing to be brought so low into this humble site, simple, raw. And if you've ever been to the region, you get to experience what some of these grottos look like. But now there's an entire church built over the apparent site. It's really remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely. No palace, no throne room, just very simple, a manger, some straw. It's really more of like a cave. We call it a grotto, and just a mother and a newborn Messiah all hanging out very humbly. And, this kind of continues the theme we've talked about in our last couple episodes about, how humble Christ's beginnings were, and God reaching out to the shepherds that we talked about in the shepherd's field, and starting from a very, very humble place.
Totally. And but there's a little bit of a jump in time from when these events took place that changed the world and when the church was actually constructed and sanctified. Tell me a little bit about that, Bethany.
The church wasn't actually built until about the 4th century. And that was with funds from Emperor Constantine. So his mother, Queen Helena, had been converted to Christianity. She converted her son, who was the emperor of huge area of the world at the time. And he gave her funds to go to the Holy Land and to find all of the sites where things happened. And he gave her the funds to begin constructing churches. So a lot of the church sites and things that you visit when you're within Israel or out in the West Bank, going to places like Bethlehem, a lot of those churches and those sites were found by Queen Helena. She built the first church there. Sometimes they've been rebuilt or they've been fixed up or reconstructed, but the original sites and everything were found by her. And in the case of the Church of the Nativity, it was later rebuilt in the 6th century by Emperor Justinian. And incredibly, from that time on, it's not changed a lot. So it's pretty much still the same church it was in the 6th century, making it one of the oldest continuously operating churches still in the world today, where, prayers and services are held, still daily.
And I know that there have been through the centuries, either some conflicts, maybe some fires, etc. But to be able to go in there and see the continuity, I mean, we're talking 1,600 years of history, maybe 1,700 years of history. It's one of those remarkable things to step back in time for Americans. I mean, unless you've traveled internationally, the oldest thing you can see in America architecturally is no more than 500, maybe 400 years. And so it's really special and remarkable, and it anchors you in a way. And millions are visiting these sites, this site specifically, every year. And what I love about the church is that also with the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, you have to get along to some degree. I mean, there's Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants that are sharing the space, all drawn by the same truth. God stepping into our time here. Well, I guess it was 2,000 years ago, but stepping into our time and place, and that changing the course of history.
Yeah, and honestly, because of those three denominations that you talked about, the Protestants, the Catholics, the Orthodox, and then in particular with the Church of the Nativity, part of why not much of it has changed since the 6th century, and it's maintained a lot of its heritage and hasn't been reconstructed a lot, is because in order to make any major changes to the church, there is a longstanding agreement that the Catholics, the Greek Orthodox, and the Russian Orthodox all have to agree on any changes. So you got to get all three sets to agree. So that's helped preserve it to some extent.
Barring decorations, you do see some plastic Christmas ornaments from time to time. I'm sure they don't all have to agree on that, but physical changes to it, correct?
Yeah, and sorry, quick correction. I said Russian Orthodox. I meant the Armenian Apostolic.
I mean, honestly, the fact that you can just rattle that off is pretty impressive, Bethany. Honestly, you've got a lot of experience in this, so we just are taking your word, I guess.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to issue the correction. Not lead anybody astray here, but yeah, it's a really beautiful reminder that if those three different denominations can get along and share, hopefully we can as well, because of course Christ unites.
Yes, absolutely. And so I think we also want to put a little caveat in here when we're reading the passage of scripture. We're talking about Bethlehem as the city of David, specifically Bethlehem Ephrata. Bethlehem and Ephrata, I believe, means the place of the fruitful place. But it may be confusing for modern tourists because Israel markets the place just south of the Temple Mount as the city of David that's been recently excavated. We're talking about Bethlehem as the original place of David, but not when he was ruling. He didn't rule from Bethlehem. He was born in Bethlehem, correct?
Right. We talked about that in the shepherd's field, and that, those fields really date back to, Ruth and Boaz, who of course then had Obed, who had Jesse, who had David. So you had this whole long line that was all hanging out in that field at one time or another, and of course ends with Jesus. So
I think it's important to anchor us back to those prophecies, though, to tie that in with Ruth and Boaz and all of that. Let's jump back into the prophecies from Micah. So Micah 5:2 defines that the Messiah must be from Bethlehem Ephrata. So let's read that. But thou, Bethlehem Ephrata, though thou be little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of thee he shall come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose going forth have been from old, from everlasting. So Bethlehem was not random. It's Bethlehem, the house of bread. It was promised the Messiah would come from David's city, and that was from everlasting. So that was prophesied, and there's so many more prophecies that attach the Messiah to Bethlehem, and the Messiah has to also be from Judah, and the current people from Bethlehem are not Jews. They're Arabs. So this has to predate the modern era, which is really fascinating stuff. And so Bethany, do you have any context around that, about pilgrimages there?
Yeah, definitely. So, pilgrims, when they're visiting here, they often get this strong sense of God keeping his promises, because you can point to all of the Old Testament prophecy. And we've talked about some of that as we've been leading up to the Christmas story and the Nativity story. So, it's one of the big things I hope everyone that gets a chance to visit, they take away. Like, God truly does keep his promises. Everything that's been foretold is going to come true. And to, of course, just take comfort in that. You don't have to worry.
Yes, and honestly, sometimes God speaks in the quiet places. Actually, I think he often speaks in the quiet places. And even though this is a very busy destination, it's a tourist destination in many ways. Bethlehem has done such a remarkable job, and those that are over the church, in giving people a moment of solitude to experience that. Walk us through what a pilgrim will see upon entering the grotto.
The very first thing, it's always kind of funny because every time I've been, someone always bumps their head, but it's known as the door of humility. So it's purposely low entrance. So it's reminding you, to bow low before Christ and have the humility. You're entering holy ground. But once you get inside, it's actually rather large. It's very tall inside. You've got big, huge columns. They are fading, but still very beautiful mosaics. There's always a strong smell of incense regularly in there. And as you're going in deeper, you'll get down to the entrance and the stairs that lead down into the actual Grotto of the Nativity. So it's a small cave actually really underneath the church. So in times when it's really, really busy there, there can be a line to go through the grotto. If you're traveling kind of in the slower seasons where it's not as crowded, you can have a really meaningful moment and actually get 5-10 minutes down there all by yourself sometimes if you're lucky, and it's just really peaceful and beautiful. And they've built an altar down there, of course, but then there is a silver star in the floor, and so that kind of is meant to represent the spot where the manger had been and where the birth happened. So that's to give you an idea of what you would experience if you were actually visiting the church today.
I think many of us Westerners, let's say, are very skeptical of when a tour guide or when a church is built over a site where they say this is the spot, and maybe it's not, but maybe it is. And so we hold on to those things loosely, but understanding this is 1700 years of tradition, and when Helena went, there would have been some sort of oral narrative as to why those sites were chosen. So it very well may be the actual spot, which was passed down by the locals for a couple of 100 years, 300 years, to get to this place where a giant church was built over it that many years ago. So why not? And experiencing being in that place, people call these thin places. Bethlehem today has gone through conflict, but the people there are so resilient. And the Christian community there is ancient. It goes back to these days, 1700 years or longer. And so it's really special to add this into your itinerary and to spend some time there reflecting. So Bethany, give me a little context, because besides this being the Grotto of the Nativity, the Church of the Nativity, there's also this amazing history of Saint Jerome translating the Bible into a modern language at the time, Latin, and giving us the Vulgate, which is sort of like a Rosetta Stone. It's helping Latin-based languages even be able to have the Bible in their language today. But that's such an impactful thing happening right next to where the Incarnation happened. Help us understand that a little bit more, and if you have any other context to add.
Yeah, it's just one of those fascinating things of so much history happening in Bethlehem, even helping to get towards the modern Bible translations that we have today, with St. Jerome having translated everything into Latin to make it easier to disperse, to help spread the word of Christ. And that happening right next to essentially where we believe he was born, it just really shows Scripture came to the world from the place where the word became flesh, and it just all ties in, because everything in the Bible and everything that was supposed to come from prophecy and all that kind of stuff, it's all very poetic, and there's too many coincidences for it not to be planned. So, it's just one of those fun tidbits that, just helps reinforce that concept for sure.
And I heard you use the term word became flesh. That comes from John chapter 1, verse 14. Why don't you just go ahead and read that, Bethany?
Sure. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth.
The Word becoming touchable, huggable.
Yeah, definitely. So the Creator breathed air he created in Bethlehem. And of course, this all happened right there, we believe, at the Church of the Nativity.
And he chose weakness or vulnerability to become our salvation.
Definitely. So, the Church of the Nativity today still invites us to kneel where God chose that weakness for our salvation. And, talking a little bit about how people tend to respond spiritually when they visit, just to kind of continue this. Me personally, the very first time I went, I was just kind of in awe. I couldn't really fully grasp it until later. The second time I visited, I wasn't quite so overwhelmed by, all the columns and the mosaics and everything. So I could really spend a little more time prayerfully contemplating the meaning of the site and things like that. But yeah, it's very awe-inspiring. I've seen people weep there before. It's a fun place to sing Christmas carols, or go back to the more traditional Christmas songs and hymns that I enjoy. And a lot of people like me, the second time going back, you're just really contemplative and you just kind of fall silent and you're taking it all in and really living in the moment of being where, as we said, the Word became flesh, where Jesus entered in with the ultimate goal of sacrificing himself for our salvation, of course. So it's overwhelming to a lot of people when they visit, but it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I've actually had the very unique opportunity of visiting and going to the Catholic midnight mass on Christmas Eve. And I guess as an anthropology student at the time, I was studying Middle Eastern history. That was just so fascinating. I had some misconceptions about what took place. Now, Catholic Christmas is different than Orthodox Christmas. So that takes place a few days later, the 12 days later, the 12 days of Christmas. But the Catholic service itself, I was taken aback because there were people from really all over the world coming to commemorate this event that happened 2,000 some years before. And they were wearing their best cultural garbs. And so what I will always remember is these South Korean ladies wearing these giant dresses with the giant bows. And you could tell that they put a lot of effort into being prepared to celebrate this moment. But it was just sort of a full circle thing for me to be able to see this. And now it was exhausting to be there at midnight, but to be able to see how people commemorate thousands of years later this pivotal moment in history. And then you go right next door. This was in the Catholic chapel, but in the Orthodox chapel, they were preparing to celebrate in the next few days, and it was ramping up for a beautiful celebration in their tradition coming only 12 days later. I have not yet had the opportunity to go in January for the Orthodox Christmas, but I'm sure it's equally as remarkable. Now, Bethany, when you are thinking about preparing travel advisors to utilize this opportunity in marketing their programs, or maybe approaching a church about coming during the Christmas season, what do you recommend for them? And how would you talk to pastors or maybe extended family members about bringing a group to Bethlehem and coming to the Church of the Nativity?
Absolutely. Yeah. Visiting there anytime during the Advent season. So, the 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas is absolutely amazing in Bethlehem. They have not done it for the last 2 years, but they did do it this year. They had kind of their opening ceremony with the fireworks and the children's choirs and the lighting the big Christmas tree in Nativity Square there. So there's a lot of celebration that happens in Bethlehem. There was one year that I was in Bethlehem on Christmas Eve, and so like they do a parade through town and everything. And so it's a great time to visit. I know most people don't want to be away from their families at Christmas, but if you go anytime, between Thanksgiving and leading up to Christmas, the town's decorated. They have a big, beautiful tree in Nativity Square. Everybody's, excited for the holiday. It's a lot of fun. Logistically, if you're visiting any other time of the year besides that, we really try to take you as the first stop of the day to the Church of Nativity, because as I talked about in getting into the grotto and that kind of stuff, you can have a big line, or we try to do it kind of at the end of the day. Our guides are excellent about, kind of helping avoid that. One thing I like to do, and I encourage others to do, is, read Luke chapter 2, because it has the best version of the Nativity story for sure. And do that in St. Catherine's Chapel. St. Catherine's Chapel is the Catholic chapel, and it's usually quieter if you're there visiting during the day and it's not a mass time. So it's a great place that a group can sit down, read it together, have a time of devotion. Sing "O Come All Ye Faithful" or "Joy to the World," is a lot of fun. And allow moments and times for kneeling and touching the star. Don't just rush to get a picture. Take a moment when you're down in the grotto and really pray and kind of contemplate. I really do recommend that. And of course, as I've stressed throughout most of our episodes so far, I'm a big fan of journaling or taking notes, because in the moment, you're absorbing so much information from your guide. You've got all the stimulation from everything you're seeing, and it's really, really overwhelming. And, when you get back home and you're trying to share with your family, it's really easy to forget things. So take some time in the moment, make some notes of a thought that came to you or something that was meaningful or that you're going to want to remember later, because, say you're on day 5 and you do Bethlehem, and you got 3 more days that you're going to be in Israel, you're going to see so much more that it's truly overwhelming. So take that time, write those notes, because you'll thank yourself later when it helps you remember and helps jog and sends you back to that moment for sure.
Yeah, totally. And I think when it comes to personal reflections, like you said, that picture will be with people forever. Hopefully they'll be able to print that out and have that memory. But when they're telling the story, I think it's really important to hear the personal story coming from Jesus. It's not like it's written directly to them, but it's for them. He's saying, "I came for you," and that is the personal message of the gospel. It is personal and it is corporate. He came for everyone, but he also came for you. And we would be amiss to not recommend that those that are listening to the podcast, it's not a mistake that you're listening to this podcast. Remember, he came for you personally. And we are excited to help you experience that in person, but it's up to you and God to experience that for yourself. So, that reality is so important. When you agree, Bethany?
Absolutely. And kind of continuing with that idea of personal reflection, some thoughts for everybody to contemplate. Number one, God came close enough to hold. He was held by Mary. He was held by Joseph. Number two, he was born in simplicity, so are you willing to meet him there in that simple place? And, he doesn't ask for anything except, your faith. You don't have to be super successful. You don't have to have been living perfectly. It's the simplicity, just simple faith. The incarnation means that we're not alone. God cared so much. He had Jesus be born. He had him live this whole childhood and learn and live with us, and then ultimately called him in adulthood to ministry and then to that final sacrifice. And no one is too humble or too low for God to visit. Again, that goes back to when we were talking about the shepherd's field in a recent episode. He called the humble first. He declared the birth to some of the most humble in society first. And Bethlehem says, God is with us in our humanity, our pain, our joy, our need. Jesus experienced all of those things too. He probably scraped his knee playing. He experienced hunger. They talk about that even in the time where he's being tempted by the devil and he's fasting for the 40 days and 40 nights. It talks in the scripture about the hunger he felt. He felt all that pain. I'm sure he felt great joy, when he saw the faith of people believing in him, when he met people like Zacchaeus, the faith of Mary and Martha, of course, the faith of his friend Lazarus, that he used to raise him from the dead. And of course, he comes to us in our need. He knows when we need him. And, the world was and still is very, very broken. And that is the reason that God sent Jesus and had him be incarnated. The whole nativity happened because of our need. So he totally understands that. And it's a great reminder when visiting Bethlehem.
He humbled himself, and that's humbling to us. And so especially with those of us who are in providing excellence and providing, surprise and delight and love upgrades and love lounge access and all of the rest, it's easy to forget that our Savior humbled himself, came down from a throne and humbled himself to be our salvation. And so we're grateful for this Church of the Nativity to remind us of that and to point back to him.
Absolutely. So that's kind of our final thoughts. Just remember all of this as we're going into the Christmas season here, or you may be listening to it on Christmas Day, taking a break after the crazy meals and spending all the time with the family. So we certainly hope you all have a very merry and blessed Christmas. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're still enjoying what we're doing, feel free to give us a like or subscribe, write us a review, send us an email and let us know how we're doing. And of course, we're always open for prayer requests if you want to send those in to us as well. We like to pray for all of our advisors and people that we work with during our weekly sales meetings. So anyways, I hope you all have a very merry and blessed Christmas, and thank you for joining us.